Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon. A lot to get into on this episode. A lot of it is going to be SEC Media Days wrap up, looking at the Georgia Bulldogs who made the preseason All SEC teams. We'll talk about that. Talk about predicted order of finish. Georgia projected to finish second per the voters there at Media Days. We'll also talk about some good news on the recruiting front from Georgia. Two big additions since the last time we recorded, and a lot of other fun stuff along the way. So stick around for this one. If you're watching this on YouTube, subscribe to Dogs 24/7. And got a shout out dogs247.com. Still have a sale right now, 30% off, or pay just $1 for your first month. So we're getting ready for fall camp to start next week. There is no better time to jump on board and follow it with us over on the Junkyard. So we'll get this episode going. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got Ben Wolk with me on this Tuesday afternoon, and a lot to get into once again on the Junkyard Dawgcast. We're going to focus this conversation on SEC Media Days, just some of the wrap-up preseason All SEC, predicted order of finish, some good news, and some lofty expectations for several Bulldogs based on that. We're also going to talk about recruiting, two big wins for Georgia since the last time we recorded, and get into some other stuff along the way. Probably talk a little Georgia basketball toward the end of this episode. Wanted to start and just briefly mention some news on the Georgia front. A couple of players around the program ending up in some legal trouble. Ja Jackson, who is a sophomore offensive lineman, arrested last week on charges that included felony possession of marijuana. We're going to have to see how that situation plays out. And then I think a few days before that, we found out that Seven Cloud, who is a defensive line commit for Georgia in the 2026 class, was back in court out in Kansas because of a domestic battery charge from back in April. We're still going to have to see how that one plays out. And as Ben and I were talking beforehand, it may be a while before we find out anything about Seven Cloud because he's not signed with Georgia as a prospect. This isn't a situation where Kirby Smart can be asked about him because he is not. He's a prospect, and coaches can't talk about that. But we will keep you guys up to date, up to speed on both those situations as we learn more. And as usual, stay glued to Dogs 24/7. We will have the information there. Well, Ben, both of us were in Atlanta last week for SEC Media Days, having a chance to hear from Kirby Smart players, but also coaches and players from the other 15 teams in the SEC. Good week down in Atlanta. Some fun getting to see some old faces, but also get ready for the 2025 football season. And thought we would start this episode by sort of looking at how Georgia projects based on what the voters saw and how they voted on preseason All SEC and also the predicted order of finish for the conference. We're going to start with preseason All SEC. Georgia with 11 players wind up between the three preseason All SEC teams. First team, defensive tackle Christian Miller, linebacker CJ Allen, defensive backs KJ Bolden and Dalen Everett, and then clean sweep on the special teams, punter Brett Thorson, kicker Peyton Woodring, long snapper Bo Gardner, return man Zachariah Branch. I think he might have been an all-purpose pick there. Second team, tight end Oscar Delp. Third team, running back Nate Frazier, offensive tackle Ernest Green. Let's start here, Ben. What is your general thought on these 11 that were picked? And if anyone you feel like was notably left out, point them out to us.
Well, I mean, I think that, Georgia, per usual, holds up pretty well with those SEC Media Days preseason votes, whether that be all SEC or whether that be predicted order of finish. I think that there weren't really any surprises. Like I don't go through the exercise as regularly as you do, but when I'm going through that exercise of like, all right, pick 3 quarterbacks, pick 6 running backs, pick 8 offensive linemen, and I'm just like, all right, I cover recruiting and I feel like I know personnel around the country pretty well. there's so many times where I'm like, I don't know how this guy played last year. I don't know what expectations for him are this year. I don't even know certain programs scheme well enough to know where they fit in or whether they're going to be accentuated in their offenses or defenses or whether they're not. And so I want to start by saying it's a difficult exercise to be able to go through, and I think it probably creates. I don't know what the data says in terms of how accurate preseason all SEC is year over year, but I imagine it's pretty challenging to be completely accurate. I mean, I think Christian Miller makes sense. I think CJ Allen makes sense. I mean, like, I think naturally people that are filling those ballots out are saying, all right, well, we're going to put a Georgia linebacker in the first team all SEC because they've won 3 Butkus awards in the last 7 years. So you'd be like, just basic numbers. It just makes more sense to put a Georgia linebacker in there. I think the surprise addition for me was probably Ernest Green, but I think that's one where we're maybe more insulated than people on the outside are. And so they look at who are some guys that are talented, who are guys that have been steady starters throughout their career and that have been successful. And so sometimes I think it's almost refreshing to see a name like Ernest Green up there because not everybody else is in the Georgia echo chamber where everything just feels like not great at all times. And he's coming off of a tough year where he was injured. And is there a chance Juan Gaston or something like that takes his spot? And, I just think it was, it was interesting to see the outside perspective on that. In terms of people that didn't get any recognition, I mean, I think it's easy to point to a lot of the transfers. I think that it's hard to throw transfers that are new at programs like Georgia into all SEC category, but I think it would have been reasonable to see any of the wide receiver transfers, which I know Zachariah Branch did on the all-purpose team, but I would have. You could have made the case for Elo Mendoza probably getting on there in some capacity as well. Especially, I think I saw today someone made a post on our board that Cole Kubelik had said that he was predicting Elo Mendoza to be SEC Defensive Player of the Year, which that was whoa, I wasn't expecting that level of notoriety recognition this early in the season. But yeah, I mean, I'm not really surprised by any of the additions there, but just per usual, Georgia's going to have a lot of names, and the special team side of it. I don't know that I've ever seen that. It's just a Georgia sweep all the way across the board, and well deserved too. Like, it makes perfect sense. Like, you're not going to find a kicker better than Peyton Woodring. You're not going to find a punter better than Brett Thorson. Like, I found it interesting that Zachariah Branch, with having never played in this league once in his life, is already the preseason all first team for all purpose and return man. Deserved. I understand where that's coming from, but it just shows you again. Like, I think that's another guy that we might just not be fully appreciating how valuable he could be to Georgia this year. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about Zachariah Branch and to start with the return man aspect of that. About 3 weeks ago, maybe I wrote a story that was just like, here's who I predict, winds up on these all SEC teams. And I gave Bakari Brown the edge as a returner to Zachariah Branch. And I thought a big part of it was Bakari's played in the league. He's played at Kentucky. He's at LSU now. But to the point you were making a few minutes ago, Ben, like, it is very difficult to put these teams together. And I always enjoy, I didn't see a ton of it this year, but anytime I share, like, hey, this is who I voted for, the comments, like, I go, pop a bag of popcorn and read through the comments.
Yeah, it's a losing exercise. There's no way to make people happy with your decisions.
And it's very difficult, especially with like offensive line. They put guards and tackles together, and you're supposed to rank them. And I'm like, okay, am I just gonna, really put more emphasis on the tackles? Like, it's a losing exercise, as you said. The biggest thing, like you said, I think that on the whole, the voters did right by Georgia. My biggest one, probably the thing that was the most different with my ballot compared to most, I had Zachariah Branch as the third team receiver, and that's me just really buying into the potential and the hype. I mean, for me, I don't really see an argument behind Ryan Williams of Alabama and Cam Coleman at Auburn. To me, those are two like very obvious first two receivers. But the thing that I've tried to get better at in this exercise year after year is not just looking at the 2024 stats. I feel like in the past, I just would really look at what they did last year. Well, this isn't a postseason award. This is, what do you think about this year? And, that those numbers will guide you a little bit and kind of help you, but how will they play this year? So that was the biggest difference, I think, in my ballot, was that I got Zachariah Branch as a receiver because I'm expecting big things from him as part of this offense this fall.
Yeah, no, I think that honestly, you could have made the case for him. You could have made the case for Noah Thomas. I know he didn't get to play as much, so that's probably, like, I think a lot of people do stat hindsight stat referencing to see like how did guys finish last year, who's returning. Like I know I was doing some of that, and like a guy like Colby Young is not going to ever show up well because he was statistically didn't have a great volume last year. But there's a case for any of those three transfer wide receivers this year or last, and it's interesting to me that Ernest Green was the selection from the offensive line because I think Monroe Freeling could have probably had a case there. Drew Bobo probably could have had a case there as well, and so it's just interesting to see outside perspective sometimes too.
Any thoughts about the preseason All SEC team as a whole? The only thing I'll point out, I was a little surprised Lenoris Sellers got the edge over Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. Now, I voted for Lenoris Sellers, so that was who I would have gone with. But the quarterback carousel there with preseason All SEC, I thought they got it right because I believe it was Lenoris Sellers' first team, Garrett Nussmeier second team, Arch Manning third. I thought some people might really buy onto the Arch train, and obviously some did. But I'm a big Lenoris Sellers believer after last year, and I think he's got a chance to have a really special 25.
Yeah, I mean, when you had started to ask that question before you'd even gone the quarterback direction, that was where I was going to go. I think it's a fascinating year because there's so many big time programs with unknown quarterback situations. Like you look at Georgia, Alabama, like Texas. We don't really know what we should be expecting from the quarterbacks at each of those places, and so there's a big time projection going on. I think it was easy to make Lenoris Sellers and Garrett Nussmeier 1-2, whichever order that you wanted to do it. I think that it's a matter of probably just what style of quarterback you're more of you gravitate towards. The interesting one for me was DJ Lagway, just because I think he probably has the highest upside of every single quarterback in the league. Is he able to translate that into a successful season? I have no idea. Is he even going to be healthy enough to translate into a successful season? I have no idea. But like if we're looking up at the end of the year and DJ Lagway is the first team All SEC quarterback, I don't think anybody would be surprised by that.
Yeah, I think I made this point on a roundtable a few weeks ago, but like Florida as a whole is a team that I'm still trying to get a feel for, and DJ Lagway is a big part of that. And yeah, I mean, if he has a really good season, I think that bodes well for Florida as a whole. All right, now let's look at the other news from this, the predicted order of finish. Georgia, per the SEC Media Days voters, projected to finish second in the SEC. Texas number one, so you're looking at a Texas-Georgia rematch in the SEC title game if what the voters picked winds up coming to fruition. Running through the entire conference as voted on there at Media Days, you've got Texas, Georgia, Alabama, LSU, South Carolina, Florida, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Auburn, Missouri, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Kentucky, Mississippi State. Ben, let's start with the Georgia piece of this. And I'll say this. I was sort of surprised that the voters had Georgia going to Atlanta. That's not to say I didn't. I have Georgia winning the SEC this year, but I thought there was a chance that with the questions on offense, with a lot of people and just talking to folks there in Atlanta, I thought the questions about Gunnar Stockton, the offense, would have Georgia probably third or fourth. But they wind up getting that projection, finishing second behind Texas. What do you think about where Georgia fell in the predicted order of finish? And again, if it comes true, it means they return to Atlanta to face the Longhorns.
I mean, I think it went how I would have expected it. I mean, Texas was clearly going to be the chosen champion. The numbers play that out. I think they got 96 points to Georgia's 44 points in the overall ballot. So it was pretty convincing that Texas was thought of as the, top dog in the SEC going into the season. I understand it. I mean, you look at the money that they spent on this year's roster just being in a unique spending environment for the 2025 season. You look at what they've done the last 2 years, being the only team in college football to make the semifinals of the college football playoff. You look at they seem to be on an upward trajectory. I think I would argue they have the most talented team roster in college football this season, though you could probably make the case to me about, Georgia or Bama or Ohio State if you wanted to. But I look at Texas and say across the board, most talented roster in college football. And so not surprising to see them won. There was probably some debate for some people, like, does Georgia take enough of a step back that they slip out of Atlanta? Does that mean, but then you have to decide who are you putting in over the top of Georgia in that situation? And maybe, Alabama would have been the one inclusion that I would say that would be fair. And I battled with that as well. Like, do I think Texas Bama is as likely as Texas Georgia? Yeah, I do think that that's probably just as likely. In the game that is played in Athens will probably determine whether it's Texas Bama or Texas Georgia. And so that's why I lean Georgia in that one, just because of the home field advantage. But I don't think you can confidently put LSU, which was the only other team to get 20 points in the ballot. I can't see any other team looking and saying, like, I'm going to put them in over the top of Georgia. It's one of those situations that probably plays out perfectly for everyone. Kirby Smart will definitely be able to lean on saying nobody believes in Georgia. You just beat Texas 2 times to win the SEC championship last year, and they still are doubling you up in preseason voting points. So Kirby will be able to lean on that, and then everybody that'll get mad at the end of the season in the event Georgia wins, when he says that, oh, nobody believed in us, they'll be able to say, we said that you were going to go to Atlanta. We said you were the second best team in the SEC. Quit pulling this card every single time that we doubt you being the number one team in the SEC. But I'm not really surprised. I'm honestly more surprised by how things shook out, like, later on, like down the board a little bit. Like, I realize now I was looking at first place votes when I was saying the 94 and 40 points or whatever. So that's going to show up poorly for everybody that's listening through, as I realize what I just said. But, it's like the Tennessees, the Oklahomas, the Auburns. Like, I feel like one of those teams, like maybe even Ole Miss, Texas A&M, like one of those teams is probably going to end up being top 5. Just the way schedules break down and the way seasons end up turning. Like, it was kind of surprising to see all those teams, as talented as some of those rosters are, that far down. But I think a lot of that has to do with Texas, Georgia, Bama were always going to be 1, 2, 3 in some order, just because that's what people are going to do by default until proven otherwise. And then you look at LSU, South Carolina, Florida are the next 3 teams, probably the 3 best quarterbacks in the conference outside of the top 3 teams. And so it makes sense why it was those 6. I just think, I get it. We talked about this on the Junkyard earlier this week. Like, I get why Tennessee is being doubted based on how things have gone with them offseason, and sound like they're still going on this offseason with Boo Carter. And so I get it, but it's like Tennessee's been the 3rd or 4th best team in the SEC for 3 years in a row now. Like, it's surprising to me that they've dropped down below A&M, and I get it. They, Ole Miss was right there last year, but Florida, South Carolina, like Tennessee's just been a better team than those other SEC East teams have been for the last 3 years. I know the East doesn't exist anymore, but it surprised me to see them that far behind South Carolina and Florida.
The thing to me, and it feels like this is the way you're kind of looking at it. For me, with picking some of these teams, I kind of look at it like a stock. And like with Tennessee, you're like, okay, I'll buy low on Tennessee if everybody's kind of counting them out. And kind of on the other side of that, I'm selling the Texas stock. Now, I think Texas will be good, but when I did my ballot, I've got Georgia 1 and Alabama 2. And I got LSU ahead of Texas, which it's all gonna be very competitive. But the thing with LSU, the reason that ultimately I kind of gave them the edge, they are one of, I believe, only 2 SEC teams bringing back their leading passer, their leading rusher, their leading pass catcher, and their leading tackler from last year. Vanderbilt is the other one, and I think Garrett Nussmeier and what they've got to work with. I see the talent in Texas, and I think more than anything, I always try to avoid with like the SEC title game. How often do we get rematches? How often do we see the same 2 teams? So that was a big part of it. I think Texas will be good. They'll probably still make the playoff, even based on how I did their win losses and going through their season. But I just decided, to the point you made with Tennessee, everybody's doubting them. Let me buy in on there. It seems like everybody's going all in on Texas, just picking up right where they left off, and I'm willing to sell that stock and just see how it plays out.
Well, no, if we're talking in stock terms, I think it's a smart decision by you. Like, I do believe in Texas. I believe in the roster. I probably don't believe in Arch Manning as much as some people do, at least not yet. But I do. That roster, top to bottom, is impressive, and they spent a lot of money on it. And so I imagine that they were spending money, pretty wisely on this class. I think Texas, more than any other program, thought that they were well positioned to be able to leverage revenue share era as we're going into it, still lean on some of the collective based stuff in the transfer portal to be able to put that roster together, and also have that built in success over the last 2 years. Like, I think Texas was in a spot that nobody else really was to build that 2025 roster. And I've said it before on the recruiting show, but like the 2025 rosters financially are going to look a lot differently than any rosters that come after it, just because it really was a bridge model between collectives and revenue share, and allowed teams who were ahead of the curve to get really creative with things. Georgia was ahead of the curve as well, though, as we know, Georgia's not going to be spending out of the collective side of things the way that Texas was during the transfer portal.
Before we finish the predicted order of finish, just wanted to go through any other teams you felt were too high, too low, and I'll just shout out. You had mentioned Tennessee. Mine is Oklahoma. I just kind of have a feeling coming out of media days that I'm buying the John Mateer hype, seeing him, and considering last year. I mean, I just think that everything that could have gone wrong, especially for the Oklahoma offense, did. At one point, they were playing walk-on receivers because they were so hurt there. I think it's put up or shut up time for Brent Venables. I think that this group is capable, and I said this on the Junkyard on Sunday, Ben. I got them upsetting Texas, which that game I think doesn't get enough credit for how unpredictable it can be year to year. So I really like Oklahoma. They were projected to finish 10th. I think they'll be a little, they'll probably be in that like 6 to 7 range, and be around 9 wins, and certainly do enough for Brent Venables to keep his job.
Well, if Mateer's as good in real life as he is in NCAA video game, man, he's fun to play. He's fun to play with in that game. So I would like that. I mean, Missouri is another one that's interesting. Like, they've been if you remember going into last year, everyone was talking about Missouri's schedule and how easy it was compared to everyone else in the conference. And it was like, is this a Missouri team that could go 11-1? They end up losing a bunch, more games than they probably should have. But like, all they're doing is flipping their schedule, away and home year over year, and it's looking relatively similar. So it's like the fact that they're down below Auburn and Oklahoma and A&M and a bunch of teams that haven't had any more success than they have over the last several years, that one intrigues me too. And I think that Eli Drinkwitz has done a good job on the high school recruiting front of building good classes together. Do I think that means they're out of order? Not necessarily, but I think that they're a team that could probably work their way up that throughout the course of the season.
The thing that's tough, especially when I go through every year, I go through and pick all the games just to kind of get a sense of, okay, where would the tiebreakers be, or just what would these records look like? And it's so funny, but you start going through these games and you're like, okay, somebody has to lose.
Yep.
There will statistically have to be somebody at the bottom of this conference. And I think there's a few like obvious ones with Mississippi State and Kentucky. Arkansas is probably there too, but they bring back Taylon Green, and we'll see if they're able to build off of last year. But trying to dish out the wins and losses like this, last year to me was the big realization of I don't think we'll see any more undefeated SEC champions, and I think it shows up when you do these predicted order of finishes. It's going to be like an NFL division where the teams beat up on each other throughout the year, and you may not come out undefeated, but if you win the right amount of games, you can get in the playoff and try to go make some noise.
I do look down at Kentucky down there, 15th out of 16th, and I hurt for Mark Stoops, man. He thought he was on the doorstep of the Texas A&M job. They, go crazy online, and it doesn't happen. And now Elko, without really having done anything, is sitting there in the top half of the league in the predicted order of finish. And a guy that's been there longer than anybody in the SEC is like, now it's like, how do you figure out Kentucky? I saw yesterday, I wish I knew where it was from so that I could properly credit the report, but that Kentucky is going to be dedicating like 45% of their revenue share to basketball or something like that, which equates to about 9 million, like 9.125 million or something like that. It's not an easy world to live in as the football coach when your basketball team's getting 9 million plus in revenue share. So yeah, I hurt for Mark Stoops right now. That's for sure.
With a report like that and just looking at Kentucky's roster, all I'll say is sometimes you get what you paid for.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we will take a quick break, come back, talk about some big recruiting wins for Georgia, check in on some other stuff going on there, and then do a little bit of a preview of fall camp, and then talk a little Georgia basketball. First, want to make sure and remind everybody, if If you're not already on Dogs 24/7, get over there, join us on the Junkyard. Get ready for the busiest time of year. Get ready for fall camp. We're going to have all kinds of stories, all kinds of behind the scenes intel as Georgia gets ready for the start of the 2025 season. 30% off for an entire year right now, or pay just $1 for your first month. This is the month to do it. Getting ready for the start of camp, the end of next week. Could not encourage that enough. Please join us over there. It's going to be a fun time with Ben, me, and Kipp Adams, and Olivia Sayer, who will be jumping back on board to help us with football coverage. So take a quick break and come right back. Ben, the last time we recorded was right after Georgia got some bad news on the recruiting front. Tyler Atkinson, I'm sure Kirby Smart enjoyed hearing us have that conversation while he was walking around at media days. But good news since then. I think that was the day after we recorded on Wednesday. Chris Abrams, linebacker, commits to Georgia, and then a few days later, Valdon Sohn also commits to Georgia, defensive lineman. Let's start with Chris Abrams. What stands out to you about this pickup, and just how big is this, especially on the heels of Tyler Atkinson news that Georgia won out with Chris Abrams?
Well, I'm not. I hate to do this, Jordan, but it is Nick Abrams, not Chris Abrams. And I know you're trying to disparage my predicted commit team just because I pulled the Nick Abrams for Tyler Atkinson switch in the last 2 weeks. Like I know that's still that's still a little hard on you, but I think, look, like you said, last time we were doing one of these, we were having a conversation at media days. Kirby Smart's walking around on his phone, all hell breaking loose, as it turns out that day. We didn't even realize at that time, if you remember, we were talking about Tyler Atkinson, missing on him. James Johnson flips to Texas like 2 hours after that. So we really hadn't even talked about that either. And so it was a not fun day. We've seen the meltdown, the Texas panic going on. Like, look, Texas is a good program with a lot of money that's going to continue to be successful. They've got a head coach that evaluates and recruits talent very, very well. Texas isn't going anywhere. If you were awake to that, you would not be surprised by that now. This has been the case for 2 to 3 years now, and Texas has just been trending in the right direction the whole time. I know everyone loves to poke fun, say, oh, Texas is back. They always love to say this. Like, no, Texas really is back, and you just have to accept the fact that they are one of the pinnacle programs in college football right now. And if you want to sit here and say, yeah, they haven't won the SEC or they haven't won a national championship, and that's your justification for why they haven't arrived, like, you're going to be late to the party, and you're going to be upset at a certain point in the future because you're going to come to the realization that you didn't realize where Texas was at. And so that's just the way it's going to be. It's going to continue to be that way. And guess what? Georgia's going to get plenty of its own recruiting wins against Texas. It's going to get plenty of its own on-field recruiting wins against Texas, or on-field wins against Texas as well. But in terms of the players that Georgia was able to add, like, look, Georgia loses Tyler Atkinson and James Johnson in one day. Within the next 2 days, or maybe 3 days, I guess, they get Nick Abrams, linebacker from Maryland, and then they get the defensive lineman Valdon Sohn from Sweden, also at a boarding school in Virginia. Look, I realize losing Tyler Atkinson and James Johnson isn't going to sit well with folks, especially on the same day, especially both ending up at the same program, especially ending up at the same program that appears to be the fiercest competition heading into the 2025 season. So I get the frustration and the panic and all that stuff. I think if you ask anybody at Georgia right now, how do you feel about, like, if you had to do a 1-for-1 replacement, Tyler Atkinson for Nick Abrams, James Johnson for Valdon Sohn? They're not exactly the same prospect, so it's really not a 1-for-1. Georgia's replacing these guys with those guys. That's not how Georgia was looking at this whatsoever. But I think you feel pretty good about those trades. Like, I think that you can live with that and say, look, Nick Abrams, high upside linebacker. Kind of different when you look at Tyler Atkinson and Nick Abrams. Tyler Atkinson, ready-made. Probably year one is going to be able to be productive in the SEC because of how he's already built, how he's already wired, the level of football that he's already played. Nick Abrams hasn't played as high a level of competition. He isn't necessarily as built or as close to his ceiling as Tyler Atkinson probably is right now. But when you look at wingspan, speed, kind of just he is wired the way that Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann like him as well. I think you look at the ceiling, the upside there. Probably don't feel better about Nick Abrams than any linebacker that Georgia had been recruiting this cycle, save for maybe Isaiah Williams, who's currently committed to Ole Miss. Like those are the high upside, freak athlete type of linebackers that Georgia loves and has found success with. I think Georgia can feel pretty good about Nick Abrams. Would they love to have Nick Abrams and Tyler Atkinson? Absolutely. But I think, Georgia's not losing any sleep saying, man, we missed on Nick Abrams or we missed on Tyler Atkinson and we had to settle for Nick Abrams. That's not how Georgia's looking at Nick Abrams whatsoever. I even had someone reach out to me after Valden Sohn commits to Georgia, given how the James Johnson thing unfolded, kind of blindsided Georgia. Georgia was not expecting it to play out the way that it had. I mean, look, he committed to Georgia 2 weeks ago. It's a dead period. You can't visit anywhere. I think it's pretty obvious what conversations were happening between James Johnson and Texas to help change his mind. That one did not sit well with Georgia. In fact, I would say that one sat worse with Georgia than Tyler Atkinson did, even though they recruited Tyler Atkinson for 4 years. I just think the way that it went, you get a word from James Johnson, it changes within 2 weeks, despite there not being any recruiting visit opportunities to have happen. Just a weird situation we haven't really seen much of before. I think that Georgia was so caught off guard by that just peeved Georgia. When Valden committed on Friday, I immediately got a message reaching out to me being like, you know what? I'll take that. I'll take that trade. Like you wanted both of them. They're slightly different in terms of how they would have fit into Georgia defensively, but I think that Valden Sohn is the guy that Georgia wanted on the defensive line. You talk about everyone that they've added already, and that includes Seven Cloud, that includes Carter Lucky, PJ Dean. It included James Johnson when he was part of that group. Like Valden Sohn was the guy that Georgia feels is different from every other defensive line recruit in this class. I think that he will find a home at 3-Tech, and you know how important that interior defensive lineman is for Georgia. I think that depending on how his body develops, and I don't think that we totally know what that's going to look like yet, he could even shift inside to 1 or 0-Tech, be more of that nose type. But I think that he will find a home early on at 3-Tech, and he is a 315-pound uber athletic defensive lineman, and Georgia doesn't usually let bad news marinate for very long. And in this case, it worked out perfectly. It wasn't planned to work out this way because they weren't expecting to miss on Tyler Atkinson. They weren't expecting to have James Johnson flip. But when you lose on your linebacker and immediately get another linebacker 2 days later, when you lose on your defensive lineman and immediately get another defensive lineman a couple of days later, I think it makes it all easier to deal with some of the optics of it all.
Yeah, I mean, Valden Sohn, you hit on the biggest thing. I mean, potentially a nose guard, but a big body there in the interior. And Nick Abrams, I was thinking of Chris Abrams Drain. I don't know if you remember him from Missouri. I was like, how did I mix those names up? But Nick Abrams fills a big need at linebacker. And also, my thing, I know that fans were upset Tyler Atkinson picked Texas. But when you look at Nick Abrams and look at who Georgia beat in that recruitment, Oregon, Michigan, I think Alabama as well. To me, that speaks very highly of Nick Abrams and especially what Georgia thinks of him. And I feel like in all this, Ben, I don't know if you feel the same way. I think folks have forgotten about Shadarius Tootle because I've gotten a lot of questions since Nick Abrams committed. It's like, okay, who else are we getting? And there's the potential they could go get another linebacker, but if it ends today and it's Nick Abrams and it's Shadarius Tootle, I think Georgia should feel really good about what it's got at linebacker in the 2026 class.
It'll be a fun conversation to revisit in December because I was having this was mid-June. I was like, all right, what route does Georgia go? I guess it was right after Tootle flipped from Auburn to Georgia because to me, Tootle flipping signaled an approach that Georgia was going to take at linebacker without really knowing what that approach was going to be. And to me, the options were basically knowing that Tyler Atkinson was going to probably be a little bit more of a big money recruitment. Do you go get Tyler Atkinson and Shadarius Tootle? Or do you go get Nick Abrams and a third linebacker and Shadarius Tootle? And I think that those were really the two options that were available to them. Looking at it in retrospect, I thought for a minute there that Georgia could get Tyler Atkinson and Nick Abrams and Shadarius Tootle. I think financially that was going to just, as we know now, was going to be a little bit aggressive to be able to pull that off. Right now, I look at who are the linebackers that Georgia's recruiting. They could do an in-state flip, someone that they eval senior year that they really like. I could definitely see that happening. We saw that with AJ Cruo last year. I could see something similar happen this cycle without knowing exactly who that might be. I do continue to say Isaiah Williams is a name that I don't think we can completely rule out. And I know that there's commentary around his recruitment because he has been committed to like 5 different schools, and it seemed like his commitment's been very flaky, and people don't like that, right? Like, if you can't trust a guy, he's going to hit the portal or he's going to be a fully NIL recruitment or whatever. It's like, I think that Georgia doesn't totally view it that way. Like, I think he has been susceptible to getting flipped at times. I think he's been very impressionable when he's gone on certain visits to other places. And I think that because of that, people have soured on the idea of Isaiah Williams as a prospect. But let's be very clear about something. And I want to be very clear about this. Of all the linebackers that Georgia has recruited this cycle, Isaiah Williams is the most freakishly athletic, talented football player at linebacker of the bunch. I firmly believe that. And so I think that when that's the case, Georgia's going to recruit you till the end. Georgia's not going to push to flip you from Ole Miss right now because it doesn't do Georgia any good to do that, because then Florida and Florida State and Ole Miss and whoever else will be doing the exact same thing with Isaiah Williams, throughout the year. But I think that you're going to see a lot of top programs. Georgia will be one. Quite frankly, Texas will probably be one. They missed on Xavier Griffin and Braden Rouse, so they have other linebackers that they want to get as well. But I'm going to be keeping an eye on Isaiah Williams throughout the fall, just because I think that Georgia thinks that highly of him. I think that he is that good. And I think now that Georgia has missed on Tyler Atkinson, and I don't see Georgia getting back into it with Tyler Atkinson based on what I know about his Texas situation, Isaiah Williams would be the guy that, if Georgia is to swing for the fences at linebacker going forward, he's the one.
I want to point out that Isaiah Williams is on my predict to commit
He
team.
sure is.
And before we turn the page, I need a ruling from you on James Johnson. So do I still – it was predict to commit, not
Yeah.
sign a commit. Where do we kind of fall on the – what's the ruling from Judge Wolk here?
Well, so I don't even want to judge on this one, because look, there's going to be the chances are, if we're just being real, the chances are there'll be at least one other example from either of our teams that ends up happening with, for one reason or another, just because of how recruiting goes. I was going to say I defer to Kipp, but now he's a little bit blinded by being part of Team Jordan as well. I might have to ask the board, figure out what their opinion on it is, because I don't want to make the ruling on that one, because it will favor me depending on which way I rule on it. The segment is predict to commit, but I also am thinking, if we have a graphic up at the end of the cycle and it's like, oh, Jordan, had this one right. See, he got James Johnson was on his list. Some people will look at that graphic and be like, what's going on here? This is a weird one. But maybe that makes the graphic more appealing. Everyone's watching my brainstorming face go on while we're doing this live. I'll have to figure this out after the show.
Yeah, I want to win. Oh, Kipp Adams is listening. He says half points. So all I'm saying is I would love to win on a technicality. That'd be perfect for me. I would sleep well if that's how I end up winning.
Half point has some merit probably. And the thing I like about a half point is, like, you can technically lose points. Like, you were at, let's say, 10 and you now are at 9.5. So I do kind of like that. Well, I'm gonna sit on that for a minute and figure that one out.
Yeah, can't wait to see what we come up with there. All right, Ben, turning the page. We're getting ready. The summer is almost over for the Georgia Bulldogs. Next week, the end of the week, they'll get fall camp underway. And next week's episode, we're going to really dive in deep when it comes to fall camp preview and all of that. But I do want to just kind of start that conversation and just set it up very easily. What is a position group you are particularly interested in watching once fall camp starts? Which one of the positions will have your full attention when camp gets underway?
Well, for me, it's probably seeing specific guys, and some of them are going to be obvious. Like, I want to see Josh McCray in person. Like, what does he look like? Like, Elo Mendozi, we've gotten to talk to him on the show before. Seems great. I've only heard positive things about him. What does he actually look like physically? Like, what I'm talking about? Like, when you see Georgia playing Austin Peay and you do the pregame walk around the field and you sort of like size everyone up. It's like, not even Austin Peay, like Missouri. It's like you just notice a difference between a Georgia body and others. And it's like, okay, the guy's coming over from Army. I've only heard amazing things about him. But like, how does he actually look standing next to Quintavious Johnson or Isaiah Gibson? Like, I just want to kind of size him up a little bit. So that's some of those transfers that we didn't get to see during spring and they weren't playing in the spring game. They fascinate me. I'm going to sound like a broken record from when we talked pre-spring and throughout spring and after spring. That safety position, what safety looks like, what star looks like, I think determines what this Georgia defense is capable of. Like if Georgia, and not who it is, it's just whoever it is that steps up in that role, how like what their potential is or what their ceiling is will determine, I think, whether Georgia's defense can get back to elite status. I think the linebackers are going to be as good as Georgia's ever had. I think that the corners are probably going to be as good as Georgia has had. Defensive front is thin, but I think there's so much talent up there, even though there's a lot of unknown. I think everybody up there you can kind of rely on, the guys that are going to be in the rotation. So it's really who's at safety? Is it Corey Thomas? Is it one of the transfer safeties at star? Does Janelle Aguero maybe fix some of the concerns that people have about him on third down situations and pass coverage? But first and second down, you don't got to worry about Janelle Aguero. He's going to be as good as Georgia's had at star. I think the question becomes, and you saw this a couple times in the spring game, like Georgia went after him on third down, and he was got a couple times, and so that will determine Georgia's season. So for me, yeah, it's that the safety position or just sort of coupling safety and star together, and then those transfers that we didn't get to see at all during spring.
For me, it's going to be offensive line. I
Yeah.
think this is a group we still don't have answers on. And, mentioning Ernest Green as part of those preseason All SEC teams, he is the only returning starter from last year's offensive line, an offensive line that was underwhelming and an offensive line that was one of the more disappointing groups on that 2024 team. So seeing how this line plays and then specifically – Monroe Freeling, who's probably going to be the left tackle, does not participate in the spring after I believe that was labrum surgery that he had. Daniel Calhoun, who's probably the starting right guard, gets hurt. I think he has a foot injury during spring, but he's expected to be back. He's expected to be full go. We didn't get a lot of examples, really none because Monroe Freeling wasn't available, of what this starting five will look like together. So seeing how this group comes together, if it's going to be the five we kind of expect, which would be Monroe Freeling, Micah Morris, Drew Bowo, Daniel Calhoun, and then Ernest Green, or if they experiment with some other guys, Michael Looney, some of the other guys who have been in the mix. You mentioned Juan Gaston earlier. What does the competition look like? Do they feel really good about the five that I mentioned a minute ago, or if there's still some legitimate competition? I wrote about on Monday, are people overlooking this Georgia offense and should they have gotten a little bit more attention coming out of media days? And that was more just a debate, kind of pointing out the reasons you might want to pay attention to this offense. But some of the folks on the Junkyard, I think rightfully so, really harped on it's going to come down to the offensive line. And that's where I am. I think Gunnar Stockton's going to be able to make enough plays. I think he's got the skill players around him. But it's on that offensive line to give him time. And just as importantly, this offensive line to do a much better job as far as run blocking and setting up opportunities for the run game to have a much better 2025. All right, Ben, going to have a quick Georgia men's basketball minute and some scheduling news. We have a pretty good feel for their non-conference schedule for the 2025-26 season, but last week, Rocco Miller reported it's going to be Georgia and Cincinnati playing each other in Holiday Hoops Giving. Georgia's going to be back in State Farm Arena. If you guys remember, they played Grand Canyon there last year. It looks like Georgia and Cincinnati will play December 13th, Atlanta State Farm Arena. I was really excited to see this matchup. If you look at Georgia's non-conference schedule on the whole, kind of lacking, sets up for Georgia to do pretty well. But I think there is value in being tested in some of these non-con games. You got Georgia Tech, like usual, but I really like the Cincinnati matchup. I think that's a Big 12 team that is about the quality, the caliber of Georgia. A good test in Atlanta, essentially a home game playing the Bearcats. Pretty excited for this one. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to this one. Our buddy Jed May's getting married that day. We may have to try to work on the schedule there, but I think this will be a fun one between Georgia and Cincinnati.
Yeah, I mean, I love just seeing the non-con basketball matchups with random brand. Like I want to see more of it, and I would prefer it much like with football. Like I would prefer it if we could do away with the. I know it sucks for those programs, but I wish we could do away with too many Austin Peays and Marshalls on your schedule. In basketball, I sort of feel the same way. It's like I don't need to see Georgia play Grand Valley State. I want to see Georgia play Cincinnati or Xavier, or, just any random brand across the country that just makes for a little bit of a different matchup.
Yeah, it won't be long, a few more months and then basketball get going, but I do think that'll be a fun non-conference matchup. Well, Ben, before we get out of here, I was going to put you on the spot. I was trying to decide if I want to do this at the first or the end, but I heard you got some good news this week. I was going to let you see if you wanted to share with the folks listening what you'll be doing. I guess that's next
Oh,
April.
I was like, what? I was like, what happened? I was like, did something good happen for me? And I'm the last one to find out here. Yeah, I mean, look, it's. I don't think of it as good news. I think of it as shout out to Augusta National for doing what they said that they were going to do. So for everyone that's been following, they might remember I was excited for a year because I got approved for Masters Monday practice round tickets. My mom, my wife, my dad, we were all getting excited about going. We get there this year. Terrible weather day. Gets delayed 2 hours before the start of the day. Didn't even know whether we were going to be allowed on the grounds. End up getting on the grounds, get our chairs set up, head over to the pro shop or the gift shop to be able to get some gear. And while we're standing in line, the storm sirens go off. Everyone has to vacate the premises. We sat in the car for a couple of hours out in the parking lot, seeing if they'd let us back in. They never let us back in. They ended up telling us we would get full refunds on those tickets and we would have guaranteed access to next year's lottery for the Monday practice rounds. Given, the heartbreak that I experienced during that whole experience, I just needed to see it to believe it. So I was like, everyone was like, aren't you getting guaranteed tickets? I was like, I don't know. I don't want to say yes. And then I don't. They followed through. I feel like I'm winning the lottery 2 years in a row, even though I know this year I didn't really win the lottery. I'm just getting, payback for what we were supposed to have last year. But I'm super pumped, and I will get overly excited for a whole year now, only to hopefully, not be let down again next time.
Getting what you're due, and unfortunately, the Hill household did not win the lottery. But there's always next year. I've got a good feeling. We got to do one person from Dogs 24/7 each year. You get it
Exactly
this
right.
year. Me and Kipp will fight to the death to see who gets it in 2027. So yeah.
Yep.
All right, we will end the episode right there. I appreciate Ben for popping on. Thanks to everyone who watched or listened to this live. Go to dogs247.com. As I mentioned a little while ago, 30% off for your entire first year, or if you want to pay just $1 for your first month, go to dogs247. As I mentioned, fall camp is less than 2 weeks away. It's going to be very busy with a lot of intel on Dogs 24/7. Perfect time to sign up and join us on the Junkyard. Go to YouTube, subscribe to Dogs 24/7, subscribe to the Junkyard Dawgcast wherever you get your podcast. Go to TikTok. We'll be having some videos posted there at a media days. And man, the ball's rolling toward the start of the season. Once we get in our fall camp, the season's almost here. And I know we're all excited, and we hope you guys will follow us and be along for the ride because it'll be a fun one. So we'll end the episode right there. For Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.